Before we get started today, we wanted to let you know that this episode includes conversations about drugs and child trauma.
New York City. It's a place that's always looking forward to the future, to what's next. 8 million souls with all of their joys and tragedies, triumphs and betrayals. We love to remember the victories, the people who were larger than life. But it can also be a harsh city where you're quickly forgotten after you're gone. For homicide victims and their families, our job, the job of the New York City cold case detectives, is to never forget them and to know what happened. We need to know who did it, and we want to stop it from happening to anyone else. When cases go cold, it threatens all of us, from Brooklyn to Queens, from Staten Island to the Bronx. My name is Vito Spano, and I was the commanding officer of the NYPD Cold Case Squad from 2001 to 2004. I was a member of the NYPD for over 22 years and have conducted thousands of criminal and thousands of death investigations. It's well known that the first 48 hours are critical in solving homicides, but that doesn't mean that once the window is gone, we're out of luck. Some of them will never be solved. We have a suspect, but can't find them. Or we can't find evidence for conviction. Or we just run out of leads. They're in purgatory. But in the Cold Case Squad, we breathe life back into these cases by any means necessary. This is Unfinished Justice, inside the NYPD Cold Case Squad. This is the story of me and my former colleagues. We're the ones obsessed with solving homicides, the cases that otherwise would fade away and stay in the evidence room forever. In 1996, the New York City Police Department investigated almost 1,000 homicides, just a huge number, and a third of those were never cleared. That means we never caught the perpetrator. And so that year, the late Deputy Police Commissioner, Jack Maple, created the Cold Case and Apprehension Squad. When we started out, we were only trying to catch suspected killers who were still on the run. But the mission quickly morphed into investigating cases where we didn't have any suspects at all. Our team was the hunting kind. We had to sift through lies and people's secrets to get to the truth. The work was gritty and all-consuming. So let me take you back to the beginning, to a murder that took place the very year the Cold Case Squad was set up. It's December 15th, 1996. Cops are busy around Christmas. Burglary, pickpocketing, and muggings are all up during the holidays. But that year, things were looking up for the city in general. Crime had been going down for a few years, and we were really feeling the holiday spirit. Our story begins with the Martinez family. Esteban Martinez, Linda Leone, and their 3 young kids. That night, the family was all together in their apartment in Parkchester, in the central Bronx. Martinez and Leone owned a store, and they were well off. The apartment was nice. Marble floors, big screen TVs, rare at that time, leather sofas, tiled bathrooms. They have their Christmas tree set up. It's festive. It should have been a joyous time of year for the Martinez family.
Martinez, go ahead, please. Hey, Ricky, what do you have over there? We got a double.
Martinez and Leone were found dead in their apartment. Their 3 young children were found covered in blood. Their eldest, Esteban Jr., was just 6 years old.
Okay. You were in the house when somebody shot your mommy?
No, nobody's in here.
Okay, well, where's your mommy at?
Die, and my father died too.
That's Esteban Jr. calling the police.
Well, where they in the bedroom?
Huh?
Where they at? In the bedroom?
No. I don't know where.
Okay, Where are they in the house with you? 34. 34. Oh, everybody give me a second. I got this file on the phone. Let me know when you get to the door so that I can tell her to
Once
go to the door,
the
please.
officers got there and got the child to open the door, they confirmed it, and then everything starts.
This is Detective Wendell Stratford of the New York City Police Department. He still has a copy of the 911 call. I've known him for a long time. A tall guy, a lover of coffee, and a very focused detective.
The child opened the door. The first officers walked through, saw the two decedents laying on the floor. The children were covered in blood because they had been crawling around and hugging their parents. So initially they thought the children had been stabbed.
For the police, for the ambulance?
Yes.
Open your door, please. The EMS is here or the police?
The EMS.
EMS will open the door for the police, okay?
Okay.
All right. 438. Complaint states that EMS is there, but they're opening it at this time. Child caller states his parents are dead, along with his 6-year-old sister at 2049 McGraw. They're checking the right now.
It was one of the most gruesome cases in years. Both parents were murdered. Both were shot. Both were tortured. The cops start searching for evidence. They find money, lots of it, but no real physical evidence that would lead to a suspect.
In a situation such as this, where both of the lessees of the apartment are dead, we have total reign, and we search for everything.
This is Nancy Borko, who was the assistant Bronx district attorney assigned to the case at the time.
Crime scene is a specially trained unit of the New York City Police Department that goes in and looks for clues with the detectives. The detectives tell them what they know, and then they continue to look.
Nancy was also responsible for interviewing the 3 children. And out of her conversation with the eldest, Esteban Jr., came one of our only leads.
We talked about Christmas because there was a beautiful Christmas tree with gifts all over it in the apartment. And we just started talking and tell me about what happened to your mommy and daddy. And Esteban said that he ran out and saw Robert.
Esteban Jr. remembered seeing 4 people, 2 men, 2 women, but he can only identify one, Rob. A name, great, but it was also out of the mouth of a 6-year-old traumatized child. And things were about to get more complicated. Investigators hit a couple of dead ends, and then they heard from the Drug Enforcement Agency. Esteban Martinez wasn't just running any corner store. He was under DEA surveillance. Here's Wendell again.
So Esteban was, for want of a better word, involved in the drug trade. He wasn't your stand-on-the-corner drug dealer. He had a liquor store and a bodega. That was more on the DEA's end because they were moving a high volume of drugs through those locations. Cocaine, kilos, half keys. That's what he dealt in. You know, a lot of money. I guess they were laundering money and drugs.
You might think that this was great news to the NYPD. More leads, right? But the DEA didn't share all of the information they had on Martinez. They want to protect their interest. They don't want to give up their sources and methods. This is called deconfliction. It happens. We don't want to step on each other's toes, and also, it can get territorial.
Drug enforcement does not investigate homicides. Homicides occur during their investigation, but they don't investigate homicides. So whatever they had, they were keeping to themselves. And they were like, well, we'll share with you what we can, but we can't share everything with you.
So the NYPD had a little bit of information on Martinez's drug trade, but not a lot. A child was the only witness. He told us the name Rob, but we couldn't find any connection with that name. The first detectives on the case exhausted all the leads, even traveling to South America, coming back empty-handed. They were on the case for 4 years, just digging and digging away. The case went cold, and it gets assigned to the cold case squad. And that's when Wendell took charge.
The records that I was looking at were records that the other detectives from the DEA and agents from DEA had looked at, and the precinct. They didn't look at all the phone records. I mean, because you can be a detective, an investigator, and you can look at stuff, and you can see it as potential, probative, no good, worthless. That's how you narrow down your focus. So I said, well, let me, look at the stuff that they did not think of having any potential to do anything.
What Wendell's saying is common cold case practice. When something first comes to the squad, we look at it differently. We'll try different angles, thinking about things that may have changed over the years, and use new technology available.
And when I did that, it was an eye-opener.
The cold case squad had time, which is what other detectives don't have. Wendell started sifting through huge piles of tiny pieces of information, looking for any connections.
I was going through all the records that the other detectives had collected, like license plate numbers, tickets, people in the area that might have gotten summonses for drinking or weed or for whatever it was.
And then he started going through phone records too.
And wasn't just the phone records, it was the pager records. So we kept seeing the same pager number with a Baltimore area code on it, but also a Baltimore landline number to his address and to his pager.
As it happens, the chief of police in Baltimore was Wendell's old boss. He connected Wendell to a brilliant detective who knew Baltimore inside and out.
Okay, I have a very strong reverence for life. As I reviewed the case and I was briefed on it, the actual incident itself is heinous. But my interest skyrocketed when I found out that there were 3 living victims in the house.
This is Detective Robert Sneed, better known as Scott.
They were murdered in the same apartment as their 3 children. And it was about 2 weeks before Christmas. That had to be a very tragic incident for those 3 young children.
Wendell and Scott clicked instantly.
Wendell's the primary detective, and he's very hands-on. He likes to see it, touch it, feel it, and taste it.
He really is. Wendell puts his whole self into the case.
So there's a lot of times where Wendell came down, he'll say, "Hey, Scott, what are you doing tomorrow?" I'm like, "Hey, whatever you need me to do." And Wendell is so driven. He might call me at 7 o'clock at night, and he'll say, "I'm working for another 2 hours. I was thinking about coming down in the morning." Say, "Well, what time do you want to start, Wendell?" He said, "I'll be there at 6 o'clock.
It's crucial to have this type of trusting relationship with your colleagues when working a cold case, because you have to be patient, really patient. Wendell and Scott started working together to retrace some of the steps of the original detectives, who had actually come pretty close to finding a man named Robert Mitchell in Baltimore years before. The primary detective at the time had also been told what the suspect looked like.
It seems as if the primary detective on the initial case came to Baltimore and he followed this lead just on a physical description, where he ended up at Rob's mother's house on Edmondson Avenue. While doing some surveillance, he took a photo of a gentleman.
And the man whose photograph he took, the man he thought was Rob, didn't match the physical description of the suspect. So it seemed like a dead end.
So when he exhausted that lead at that time, based upon the information that he had, it went stale and went stagnant, and he started looking at different avenues of approach.
But it turns out the man in the photograph wasn't Rob. It wasn't until Wendell and Scott were on the case that anyone realized how close the original detectives had come. This is another thing about the cold case squad. We have the time to retrace steps of the original investigators and realize where they made wrong turns.
That's where Wendell, tying it in with a fresh set of eyes and a little bit of time, a couple of years later, he reevaluated and he ended up back in Baltimore. Time heals the cases. You also have the ability to gain 20/20 vision in hindsight. And this sounds counterintuitive, but sometimes that's how you look at it. You're like, wow, I see how this small piece of information would fit and make you go left as opposed to right 4 or 5 years ago. But now I'm on a balcony view and I'm looking at every piece.
One of those new pieces looked very ordinary and not useful at all. A parking ticket issued near the Martinez apartment.
So when a homicide occurs, the precinct detectives go out and we do what's called a canvass. We go around the neighborhood, we take the license plates of every single car that is in the general vicinity of the homicide.
So there was this parking ticket issued to a vehicle from guess where?
And it was from Baltimore.
The car was registered to a woman named Keisha Washington. Wendell took the name to Baltimore to talk to Scott, who had been gathering background information on Robert Mitchell, the man who the precinct cop had almost found.
I was like, what about this name here? Does this name ring a bell to you? Keisha Washington, does it come up? He goes, Keisha Washington? He goes, the Robert Mitchell that we looked at has a son with the Keisha Washington. We're like, no shit, you kidding me? He goes, no. He goes, yeah. So we're like, okay, well, let's find her.
So he did find Keisha, but Wendell knew they couldn't just go and arrest her.
There's nothing we can do right now. I mean, it's ludicrous just to go grab somebody just because you think that they might have been there. So we needed to game plan.
So I contacted Keisha, knowing that she had a child, and I just made some inquiries as a social worker. And during this conversation, she confirmed who she is.
Yeah, Scott lied to her. Sometimes you gotta do what you gotta do. Cases can take a long time to build, especially cold cases. You only have one shot.
I didn't want to walk up to her door and say, hey, I'm Scott. I'm with Baltimore Police Department assigned to ATF, and I'm doing a favor for some guys in New York. That wasn't the approach. I engaged in several dozen conversations with Keisha under the notion that she thought I was a social worker for the state of Maryland. And when I started talking to her, she verified that she has a son, Robert Jr., and his father is Robert Mitchell. And she gave the address that she knew where he lived at.
Scott kept on talking to her, building up knowledge about her life, and trust between them grew while he was feeding information back to Wendell.
And he said, Scott, let me get this right. You were talking to her and she thinks you're a social worker? And you've been talking to her twice a day over the last week and a half? And he said, well, how the hell did you do that? I employ a lot of non-traditional investigative tactics that Wendell found out.
The more Scott and Keisha talked, the more she talked about Rob, sharing thoughts on their relationship and the type of father he was to Rob Jr.
She hadn't had contact with Rob in about a year. He calls periodically just to see, hey, is my son okay? And then she would probably go another 3 months without hearing from him. And I was under the impression he wasn't providing any support for his son. So I told her, I said, it would probably take me about 6 to 8 weeks, but I'm pretty sure as a result of this audit, you would be entitled to a couple $1,000s of back pay that I would do everything possible to expedite. So, of course, it got her attention. She got more engaged. She had a pretty good job at Johns Hopkins, making some money. But the reality of it is she was a single mom doing the best that she could to raise her son. So any additional financial assistance would be beneficial. And it got to a point where I would just call her, hey, Keisha, how are you doing? How's everything? And she was telling me she had really got into religion over the last couple of years. She had a newfound faith.
Scott also began looking deeper into Keisha's brother, her twin, actually.
I said, okay, she has a brother named Kevin. Let me start looking into Kevin's arrest history. Kevin had some previous convictions on his record, nothing really big. I said, wow, he doesn't have any recent arrest. Is he a choir boy now? What is he doing? But then it dawned on me, he didn't have any arrest history over the last 4 or 5 years because he was recently convicted of an attempted murder by shooting. And when I looked at the time frame of it, the shooting occurred approximately 6 weeks after the Estebans were murdered inside their house in Parkchester.
The case was moving, but time was running out. The closer they got, the more Keisha expected her missing child support payments.
I would call Sneed and say, hey, where's it at? He goes, bro, you need to get down here because I can't keep this charade up with her because now she wants money and she wants to get it.
It was time to come clean with Keisha and confront her about the murder. How that went down? After a short break. Wendell and Scott knew that Keisha's patience was running out. So it was time for Scott to drop the social worker ruse. They had to find out what Keisha knew about the murders of Esteban Martinez and Linda Leon.
So I spoke to my lieutenant and I told the DA, I go, listen, I need to go to Baltimore and I need to pull this chick out of the hospital and we need to talk to her. And he said, yeah, go ahead, take a couple days, go down there. So myself and Detective Steve Kaplan, we took a ride down to Baltimore and we met up with Detective Sneed at their headquarters and we said, you know what, she's working right now, let's go to the hospital and talk to her.
So I agreed to meet her at her job, and I told Wendell, and Wendell said, are you serious? You're going to meet her at her job?
The cold case squad was about to stage a confrontation with a potential accomplice to a murder in the lobby of one of the busiest hospitals in Baltimore.
And we met Keisha on a cold, rainy day at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Like I said, she was a dietary aide. I called her on a cell phone. I said, hey, Keisha, I'll be there in about 20 minutes. Bring down some photographs, bring down all your notes. Where would you like me to meet? I said, I can meet you in the lobby on the Wolf Street side. Unbeknownst to her, we had already been there. We scoped everything out. We were sitting in the lobby. She came up, greeted her, handshake.
Now, this is the moment of truth for a detective. Months, years of painstaking work can be lost in a moment.
I had a small notebook in my hand. I had a pen. So when she sat down, I just scratched out some quick notes. And, we talked for about 5 to 10 minutes. And she was at ease. Keisha was very mild-mannered, even-tempered.
We're in a lobby area, and myself and Detective Kaplan are sitting on some couches away from where Detective Sneed is sitting.
Wendell was probably sitting 5 feet away. My sergeant was sitting in back of her. And I guess she just thought this was a regular day at Johns Hopkins, people waiting for procedures or loved ones to finish checkups. So I kind of caught Keisha off guard.
But it wasn't a regular day. Keisha's life was about to change drastically.
Wendell provided me with a picture. It was a family picture of the Estebans and their 3 children right in front of them. So I opened the notebook and I pulled out the picture. I said, Keisha, I got a picture. I want you to check this out. Tell me if you know these people. So I showed her the picture and she held on to it. She had it right in her hand. And she just looked at the picture for about a minute before she said anything. She said, Scott, these aren't your kids. I said, no. The couple in the picture, that's their children. I said, do you know them? She said, no. I said, well, look at the picture. Look at it good. She turned the picture to the side. She moved it back and forth in front of her face.
So somewhere along the conversation he's having with her, she's getting a little nervous. And she keeps looking at us, wondering what these 2 guys are doing here.
And she had a tear roll down her cheek. And she said, Scott, you're not a social worker, are you? I said, Keisha, I'm not a social worker. Are you here to talk to me about the stuff that happened in New York? I said, is there something that you would like to finally get off your chest? I said, you're a woman of God. And she said, I knew this day would come. I didn't know when, but I knew this day would come. And I said, well, would you like to take a ride with me so we can start getting some closure?
When you are a cop and this happens, it's such a relief. The circuit just opens up. You've invested a lot of time in this, and you now have connection. But they still had to get Keisha to talk. So Wendell called the DA's office to strategize.
I called Nancy Borko, the district attorney, and let her know that we had Keisha in pocket. But, Nancy's thing is, well, if she doesn't give you anything, you really have nothing. So give it your best try. And, that's what we did. So hung up with Nancy, decided what I was going to say to her, and then went in the room with her to start our interrogation.
You don't want to speak to your suspect. And of course, this is more detective work than I, because I don't speak to suspects until after they're arrested. You don't want to go to learn things. You want to go knowing everything there is to know before you speak.
What does it take to get someone to open up to you? Empathy? Grit? Patience? The right detective can really work wonders.
Well, it was December 96.
She laid out everything from start to finish. She talked about Rob's involvement. She talked about her brother, her twin brother's involvement.
Months before time, Robert Mitchell kept complaining about how Tone kept burning as far as the drugs. The weight wasn't right, and he was starting to lose money, so he got frustrated. So Robert and Kevin had a discussion about going to New York, seeing if he can get more money, seeing if he can talk to Tone about getting straight as far as what he lost as far as the money. Kevin and Robert talked about it. Then they discussed it with myself and Niecy.
And that's where we learned about Denise Henderson.
A fourth suspect. After all this time patiently searching, with almost no leads, suddenly the cold case squad was in a race to track down a lot of people. Armed with Denise's full name, Wendell and Scott quickly discovered where she lived.
We had a picture of Denise. We knocked on the door, rang the bell, and who answered the door? It was Denise Henderson. I remember we came in the door, we said, hey, what's your name? And she was very hesitant. She gave us maybe 4 fictitious names. And Wendell had a folder, and Wendell reached into the folder, and he came out with a picture of her. And he said, do you know this lady? And she looked at the picture. She was like, no, I never saw that lady a day before in my life. And Wendell said, wow, every time you look in the goddamn mirror, you should see her because that's you.
Here's Wendell again.
So I just told her, cut the shit. I go, you're Denise, this is you, and you need to come with us. Come, who are you? He said, we're the police. What, police for what? I got my kids here. I can't go anywhere. I go, no, you're coming with us today. And she's like, for what? She goes, we're here from New York. He's from Baltimore. And it's about something that happened in the Bronx. You come with us, and she just like started crying and boo-hooing, all kinds of shit. And we're like, get your coat on.
Now, finally, the cold case squad got the full story. Keisha and Denise took detectives back to the scene of the crime. Their story actually starts a few weeks before the murder.
Robert Mitchell, had been allowed to come to Esteban's apartment, something that people who are in that type of business, especially with the kind of money he was making, would never allow someone that he did not trust who was in his circle to come into their residence with their family and children. He allowed Mitchell, the one time Mitchell and Keisha Washington, to come to their apartment. Probably because he was just in a hurry, didn't feel like going to wait for them to meet him at a hotel on the highway, and just needed to get it done. So he gave them the address and let them come there. Robert Mitchell comes to the apartment. It's an apartment in part of the Bronx known as Parkchester. Very nice, working people, middle class, upper middle class that live there. It's kind of insular. There's stores there, and you would never expect something like this to happen there. Once they get there, Rob looks around. He's like, look at this apartment.
It was clear that Rob was absolutely gobsmacked by the life they lived and quite frankly wanted it. And I mean all of it. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. I used to work in narcotics and can recall countless times dealers have robbed other dealers. Greed, envy. There's so many reasons why this happens. But basically, Rob wants what Esteban has.
Mitchell, coming from Baltimore, sees this and he's like taken in, like, oh, wow, this guy must make a lot of money. I'm hustling on the corner, making, nickel and dimes, and this guy's living the life of Riley. He calls his friend Kevin Washington. Kevin Washington is Keisha Washington's twin brother. Kevin is for want of a better word, a real-life thug criminal. Been involved in shootings. He's a robber, does sell drugs. He shot some people. And Robert Mitchell feels if I'm going to have somebody to do something with, it's going to be Keisha's brother. They all get together one night. They all meet at Robert's house. And they sit down and they have a plan. Robert tells him, I know a guy that got a lot of money. He's a drug dealer. He's my connect in New York.
But they tell Wendell they were initially worried about Esteban being a big drug dealer. They weren't worried so much about the crime, but more about the repercussions.
But Robert assures them that Esteban, other than knowing how to contact him, he has no idea where he lives in Baltimore, knows nothing more about him other than his first name is Rob.
Somehow, Rob persuades the others, and they devise a plan. They get some handcuffs, duct tape, they pick up guns, they decide to take the bus up to New York so nobody will know how they got there.
Robert gives them the address to Esteban's house, and as they're progressing towards the Bronx from Manhattan, he paged them before they left Baltimore, he paged them when they got to New York, and then he paged them from down the block. And each time Esteban will call back, and he's like trying to tell him, no, listen, I can't do this. And he goes, I told you. He goes, I'm home. I'll get back to you. That's all Robert wanted to hear, that they were home, because he knew where the apartment was. So they walk to the apartment building.
They take the stairs. Rob hands out gloves to everyone and knocks on the door. Linda answers it. She is surprised to see everyone. Esteban comes and asks them, what are you doing? Why are you here? It's just before Christmas and a connect comes up to your house with your partner and 3 kids inside? Esteban immediately knows something is wrong. So Rob acts fast. He pushes them on the couch.
And then they handcuff and duct tape them together. And Esteban is like, what's going on here? Yo, what are you doing? And he goes, tell me where the stuff is. I want to know where the stuff is. And he's like, what are you doing? Stop. While this is going on, it's causing a commotion. So the children come out of their room and they see these people in there.
And Rob knows that the kids know who he is. He's been to the house before. And Esteban Sr. introduced him to the kids as T.O. Rob, Uncle Rob. So he panics. And when there's panic, things can turn ugly really fast.
Denise and Keisha are instructed to take the children in another room and go in that room and start to look around and see what you can find. Kevin and Robert are in the living room with Linda and Esteban. And Kevin starts to look around the apartment in the cabinets, in the drawers for where it is. Meanwhile, Robert is telling him, tell me where the stuff is and we'll leave. And Esteban, for whatever reason, is telling him there's nothing here. I don't know why you're doing this. I don't have anything in the apartment. And just by chance, Kevin opens up a cabinet and finds some cocaine in that cabinet. And then they get all excited. Keisha comes out the room and says, hey, look at what I found. A bag of money that was hidden behind one of the projection televisions. They had no time to count it. So now they are in a frenzy because now they know that there's stuff there. They also know that Esteban is lying to them.
Kevin and Rob start to lose control and begin to threaten and torture the couple.
During all of this, the girls go back in the room because the kids are crying now. They're upset, trying to calm them down. And they're still searching because they're searching in the closets, they're searching behind the TV, under the mattress, turning everything over. Kevin and Rob, now that they have Linda and Esteban subdued, ripping apart the living room and the kitchen, looking for stuff. They do find more drugs. A couple of keys of cocaine. They find money in the living room. Keisha and Denise find some more money in the children's room. And then they go look in another room. But they're not satisfied with that because what they found is a lot to them. And they know there has to be more because they know that Esteban is a big drug dealer. So when the girls come out of the room, they're like, come on, we got all this money. We don't need to be here. You got the drugs. Let's go. So as they're leaving, Kevin says, they know who we are. And Rob's like, the only person they know is me. I'm the only one that could be. Come on, let's just go. Kevin takes the gun, and we're not really sure in what sequence it occurred. He shoots Linda in the head. And then we assume that he hands the gun to Rob, and Rob shoots Esteban in the head. And then they leave them there. And they run out. Kevin wants to kill the kids. And Denise and Keisha stop him from killing the kids. As they're leaving the apartment, a neighbor who had heard the gunshot looks out her door. And Rob says something about close the effing door. And she closes the door, but she doesn't call the police.
The detectives have cracked the case. They've arrested Keisha and Denise. Kevin, remember, is already in prison. Now they just need their last suspect, Rob.
The biggest part of that is his mother took us to where he was because she was afraid that some drug dealers were going to come to her house after him for some money that he owed, which really wasn't the case. But she took us to where he was and pointed out the apartment he was in and took a cab to leave because she wanted to have nothing else to do with it. That sticks out in my mind. We went there with a warrant squad team from Baltimore PD where they had to kick the door in. He was with two naked girls getting high, and he went and fled, and he was hiding underneath the bed. And we dragged him out from underneath the bed in his boxer shorts.
So once they had him in custody, the interrogation began. He took them back to the moment when they decided to kill the couple. They could have just left. Here's what Rob told them.
I was like, if something happened, that shit is going to happen to me. I was like, because they don't know none of y'all. I said, whatever go on, going to come to me.
You were telling this to all of them, to the three of them?
Yeah. I was like, if some shit kick off, that shit is coming to me. I was like, they don't know none of y'all.
That decision would be Rob's undoing. He thought he was covering his tracks by murdering the couple. But the whole crew went down because Esteban Jr. remembered his name. Each of the four fell one by one.
Kevin got 50 years to life. He was sentenced in 2004. Currently, right now, he is in custody. Kevin's twin sister, Keisha, cooperated at trial and testified for the prosecution, and she received a sentence of 6 to 12 years for robbery first degree. Robert Mitchell, who was Keisha Washington's boyfriend, they have a child in common, took a plea and he was sentenced to 25 years to life. Earliest release date would be 2028. He has a maximum parole date of 2029. Denise Henderson, who was Kevin Washington's girlfriend, pled guilty to robbery first degree and burglary, and she was sentenced to 6 to 12 years. Currently, she is off parole, and she was released from state prison in 2007.
They were proud of the cold case squad to have cracked such a horrible case. As Wendell says, nothing can bring back Linda and Esteban, but at least Esteban Jr. and his siblings have some sort of justice concerning the individuals responsible for the murder of their parents. The detectives on the cold case squad wanted justice for those kids. And for us, it's also about finding every killer in New York City, even if a case is out of the news, even if most people have forgotten about it, even if the victims weren't upstanding citizens. It's the kind of tenacity that solves the hardest of cases. Some people would say it's obsessive, but it's our way of showing we care. One of New York City's most famous cold cases was defined by how much we cared, even when it seemed like maybe we were the only ones who did. It was especially tragic because a child was the victim of a violent crime, and it took over 2 decades for us to even figure out who she was. Next week on Unfinished Justice, inside the NYPD Cold Case Squad. Unfinished Justice, inside the NYPD Cold Case Squad, is an Asterlight podcast. From Asterlight, our executive producers are Kathy Tankosic, Joe Paletto, and Sam Roseman. Our production partner is Neon Hum Media. Our lead producer is Crystal Genesis. Our associate producer is Liz Sanchez. Maura Walls edited this episode. The executive editor is Catherine St. Louis. Samantha Allison is our production manager. Original music by Asha Ivanovich. Sam Baer engineered this episode. Laura